Wednesday, 5:17 p.m., Sacramento, California. The world outside was gold and fading. Sunlight filtered through dusty blinds into a cluttered garage, illuminating boxes marked "Dad's Junk" in thick black Sharpie. Frank Dalton stood there in silence. A week ago, this had been his son's guest house. Now it was his exile. One cot, one lamp, no heat, no love. The door behind him slammed shut. "Dinner's at 6, his daughter-in-law muttered. "If you're coming, knock first." She didn't wait for a reply. He didn't give one. Frank sat slowly on the edge of the cot. His knees ached, his back screamed. He stared at the oil stains on the concrete floor. Once, he'd built aircraft engines with those hands. Once he had a house, a pension, and a woman who loved him. Now, he had a garage. 8:02 p.m., inside the main house. He sat quietly at the corner of the dinner table. His son, Greg, barely looked up from his phone. His wife, Lauren, pushed green beans around her plate. The grandchildren, 2 boys, 9 and 11, were glued to tablets. "How was school?" Frank asked, gently. No response. He tried again. "Did you learn anything cool today?" "Grandpa, you're weird," the older boy said, eyes never leaving the screen. Lauren smiled awkwardly. "Kids these days, they're just used to their space." Greg finally spoke. "Dad, could you stop asking so many questions at dinner? It stresses them out." Frank nodded. Slow. Small. "Sure. No more questions." 9:27 p.m., back in the garage. He unfolded an old flannel blanket and lay on the cot. His phone, an ancient flip model, buzzed once. A text from Doris, his wife's best friend. "Still thinking about you. Evelyn would be furious." He smiled. "I know," he whispered to no one. Thursday, 11:13 a.m., the sidewalk outside. Frank sat on the curb, feeding pigeons bits of stale bread from his pocket. Lauren had said not to be inside when she had her book club, so he wasn't. A man walked by with a grocery cart, muttering to himself. Frank nodded politely. The man paused. "You out here too?" "Just for a bit," Frank said. "Right, that's what we all say, until a bit becomes forever." The man shuffled on. Frank stared after him. 12:45 p.m., neighborhood cafe. He sat at a small outdoor table, nursing a $3 coffee he couldn't afford. "You can't just sit here all day," the barista said, politely but firmly. He reached into his wallet. Only a $5 and a bus ticket. "I'm leaving," he said softly. The girl's face softened. "Sorry, sir, company policy." He tipped his hat and walked away. 3:30 p.m., park bench, Midtown. The wind picked up. Frank pulled his jacket tighter. His stomach growled. A group of teenagers nearby were filming a TikTok, laughing, shouting, dancing, careless. Frank watched, amused, and a little envious. One of them noticed him. "Yo, old man, you okay?" "Fine," Frank said with a polite smile. "You sure? You look kinda ghosty." He chuckled. "That's just the lighting." The kid smirked and ran off. Frank's smile faded. 5:42 p.m., back at the garage. Dinner was over. No one had knocked. A paper plate sat on the step outside the door. Lukewarm chicken, canned corn. He picked it up without complaint. But as he sat alone on his cot, chewing quietly, he stared at the ceiling and thought, "This isn't living. This isn't even waiting to die. It's just disappearing." 7:10 p.m. Message from Doris. "Come to the church tomorrow. We're starting something new." "New?" he replied. "People like you, like us. Forgotten, but not gone." Friday, 10:40 a.m., St. Luke's Community Hall. Frank stirred the coffee in his paper cup, his hands shaking slightly, not from age, but from unfamiliarity. He wasn't used to being noticed anymore. He sat near a young woman with streaks of pink in her short hair. A name tag on her flannel shirt read May. She gave him a crooked grin. "So what are you? Ex-army? Ex-husband? Ex-something?" Frank blinked. "All three." She laughed. "You'll fit right in." At the front of the circle, Doris cleared her throat and clapped once. "Welcome, everyone. This space is for anyone who's been left behind, told to move on, or pushed out of their own story. You don't need a resume here. You just need a name." One by one, they introduced themselves. Jonas, a laid-off welder whose kids hadn't spoken to him in 4 years. Rosa, a retired nurse who now couch-surfed between nieces. Terrence, a quiet Iraq vet who carried his service dog's leash like it was an extension of his own soul. Each voice cracked slightly, not from weakness, but from how long it had been since anyone listened. When it was Frank's turn, he took a long breath. "Frank Dalton. I used to fix things that flew. Then I buried my wife, and I guess the world decided that I didn't have any more use." There was silence, then nods, then a hand on his shoulder. 12:15 p.m., potluck lunch outside. They ate under the sun, folding tables stacked with casseroles and peanut butter sandwiches. Frank helped a man with a walker balance his tray. "You ever think we're all just the leftover drawer?" the man asked. "Sometimes," Frank said, "but even leftovers keep people fed." They both chuckled. Across the table, May held up a flyer. "Community garden project. We're going to clean up the empty lot behind St. Luke's, build raised beds, tomatoes, herbs, real stuff." She looked at Frank. "So, you know how to use power tools? Grandpa jet engine?" Frank smiled for the first time in days. "You bet I do." Saturday, 9 a.m., behind the church. The lot was a mess. Broken concrete, weeds as tall as children, a rusted shopping cart in one corner. But to Frank, it looked like purpose. They worked with what they had: shovels with splintered handles, paintbrushes held together with duct tape, and hope. Frank took the lead on building the tool shed frame. He showed May how to measure twice, cut once. He helped Terrence dig holes for the fence posts. He even laughed when Rosa called him the old man with a drill. 1 p.m., cooling down on milk crates. Sweat dripped from Frank's forehead. His knees were screaming again, but this time they screamed for a reason. Doris handed him lemonade. "You remember how to feel useful?" she asked. He nodded, eyes wet. "I forgot how fast that gets taken from you." "Then take it back." Sunday, at the garage. Greg stood in the driveway watching Frank clean rust off a donated rake. "You've been gone all weekend." Frank didn't look up. "Been helping at the church." "Doing what?" "Building something." Greg scoffed. "You should rest. You're pushing 80. Frank finally looked up. "Rest is for the dead." Greg muttered something under his breath and went inside. Frank didn't follow. Monday, local grocery store. Frank stood at the checkout line with a basket full of nails, zip ties, and a can of wood sealant. The teenage cashier scanned items slowly, eyeing him. "You at that church project? My uncle's helping out too." "I am," Frank said. The boy smiled. "Cool. He said you know your stuff." Frank smiled back. "I used to. Looks like you still do." Tuesday. The garden takes shape. The beds were built, the compost pile was set, seedlings lined up like a promise. Frank spent an hour teaching May how to wire a rain barrel. Terrence painted. Thursday, 6:45 a.m. The garage. Frank was already up. He sharpened garden shears on a whetstone, steady and methodical, like a man tuning a memory. Inside the main house, Greg and Lauren prepared school lunches. The house still hadn't offered him a real place inside. Frank didn't care anymore. Out here in this dimly lit garage, he had something better than walls. He had clarity. 7:12 a.m. Breakfast table. Greg stood at the counter, chewing toast. Frank walked in holding a freshly oiled shovel. "I'll be out most of the day. We're installing the new irrigation line." Greg raised an eyebrow. "You're doing that in this heat?" "Yep, won't water itself." Greg shrugged. "It's just a church garden, Dad. You don't have to kill yourself over it." Frank looked at him. "It's not about the garden." "Then what's it about?" Frank took a long breath. "It's about purpose, something you stopped seeing in me a long time ago." Greg's face tightened. "Oh, here we go again." "No, not again," Frank said, calm but firm. "Just once, the truth." 7:18 a.m. Silence over coffee. Frank sat down. "I gave you this house when your mother passed. You had 2 kids, a mortgage. I had a pension and a broken heart. I didn't ask you to move in." "No, but I did, because I believed I was still part of your life." Greg set his mug down. "You were, until you started acting like this was your house." "I never wanted your house," Frank said quietly. "I just wanted to be your father again." Greg looked away. Frank stood. "You didn't push me out, you just never reached back. That's worse." And with that, he left. 10:02 a.m. St. Luke's garden lot. Frank arrived to find a stranger sitting on an overturned bucket near the compost bins. Early 30s, Latino, worn-out boots, sweat-stained work shirt, eyes that carried weight. May approached cautiously. "He's been asking for you." Frank walked over, cautious but curious. "You're looking for something?" He stood, awkwardly respectful. "You're Frank Dalton?" "That's right." "My name's Javier. I was told you used to fix turbines, jet engines." Frank nodded slowly. "Long time ago." "I need help." 10:08 a.m. Under the shade tent. Javier explained everything. He worked maintenance at a regional airport outside Stockton. Budget cuts, broken gear. They'd grounded 2 planes because of a pressure valve system no one could fix. But someone had told him about a Mr. Dalton, who used to do it with just a socket wrench and a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. Frank laughed. "That sounds like me." Javier pulled out a notebook. "I don't want money. I want to learn. I don't want to be fired. I got a wife, a daughter. This is all I got." Frank looked over him, desperate but honest, just like he'd been at 30. 11:30 a.m. Community tool shed. Frank rummaged through the old donated kits, pulling out a few measuring tools and a sample valve piece. He sat with Javier under the shade and began to explain not just how the part worked, but why. "It's not just pressure, it's rhythm. The whole system breathes. You don't fix machines, you give them back their breath." Javier scribbled notes furiously. May passed by, whispering to Rosa, "Look at him, like a professor." Rosa smiled. "No, like a man who remembered what he's made of." 4:45 p.m. Greg's driveway. Frank returned, sunburnt and covered in dust. Greg was washing his car, earbuds in. Frank nodded, walked past him toward the garage. But Greg pulled an earbud out. "Hey!" Frank paused. "You're mentoring someone now?" Frank blinked. "Word gets around." "That Javier guy stopped by, said you taught him more in 3 hours than his company did in 6 months. Greg's tone wasn't mocking. It was impressed. Monday, 8:12 a.m., St. Luke's garden lot. The summer heat was already clawing at the earth, but Frank didn't care. He was alive, in the way only a man who thought he was forgotten could feel. Javier arrived early, holding a manila envelope in both hands like it was a sacred object. "They want to meet you," he said. Frank blinked. "Who's they?" "Maintenance chief? Regional ops guy? The plane's still grounded. They saw your sketch on my notepad, said it looked genius." Frank raised a brow. Genius is just memory in disguise. Tuesday, 10 a.m., Stockton Regional Airport. It was the first time Frank had walked across a tarmac in over a decade. The smell of jet fuel, the echo of clanking steel, the faint tremble of turbines winding up. It made his heart race. Inside the hangar, 2 men in uniform stood by the grounded plane. One was in his 40s, stern face, clipboard in hand. The other, younger, clearly skeptical. Javier introduced them. Frank extended his hand. "Frank Dalton. I worked for West Aero for 37 years. The older man shook it with hesitation. "We're told you might have a solution." 10:22 a.m. Engine bay inspection. Frank climbed the stepladder slowly. Every creak of his knees reminded him this body wasn't 50 anymore. But his eyes, his hands, they remembered everything. He ran a finger over the cracked junction point, tapped twice, listened to the hollow echo. "Not the valve. It's the support bracket. It's vibrating under torque. You fix the valve, it'll just pop again." The young guy scoffed. "How can you tell that without diagnostics?" Frank looked at him with a half smile. "Because I've heard it cry before." Silence. The older man finally nodded. "We'll do it your way." Wednesday, 5:45 p.m., Greg's backyard. Frank sat on a folding chair under the shade, watching Greg toss a football with his sons. The boys laughed, not at him this time, but with each other. Greg walked over, wiping sweat from his brow. "Heard about the engine?" Frank sipped his lemonade. "They said it worked. The plane's back in the air." "They offer you a job?" Frank smiled. "They offered me a contract, consulting, part-time." Greg blinked. "And?" "I said no." Greg frowned. "Why?" "Because I'm already working full-time, at something that feeds more than just machines." Thursday, community garden grand opening. The mayor came. The local paper sent a photographer. Kids from the middle school sang a corny song about tomatoes. But to Frank, it was beautiful. He stood by the irrigation system he helped design, watching water flow through tubes like arteries. The garden pulsed with life. Doris took the mic. "This space is more than green things growing. It's proof that broken things and broken people can be rebuilt into something better." She gestured to Frank. "And no one taught us that better than Mr. Dalton." Applause. Genuine, warm. Frank didn't know where to look, so he just bowed his head. Later that night, under the stars, May brought out folding chairs. Javier brought his daughter, a shy 8-year-old who hugged Frank without warning. Frank froze, then melted. "She says you're her favorite old person now," Javier grinned. "Tell her I'm honored," Frank replied, tight voice. They sat in silence, the garden behind them, the moon above. May lit a citronella candle. "You're not just fixing engines anymore. You're fixing the people they left behind." Frank stared at the stars. "Funny, all I wanted was to be remembered." May looked at him. You're unforgettable now. Saturday, 8:57 p.m. The garage. The summer air had cooled, and for once, Frank didn't mind sleeping in the garage. He'd added a second cot, just in case. He didn't know for whom, but something about having the space ready made him feel less disposable. The garden was thriving. Javier's airport was running again. Even Greg had started asking for his opinion more often than his silence. Frank sat in the dim light, flipping through a photo album, the old kind, with yellowed edges and the faint smell of glue. He lingered on a photo. Evelyn, holding a toddler. The boy was all cheeks and laughter. "Michael," Frank whispered. "My first mistake, and maybe the one that hurt the most." 9:03 p.m. A knock. 3 soft knocks, uncertain, hesitant. Frank closed the album and stood slowly. He opened the garage door and froze. Standing there was a man in his 40s, thin frame, old combat boots, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. His eyes, sunken, tired, but unmistakably familiar, searched Frank's face. "Hi, Dad," he said. Frank didn't speak. Couldn't. "I didn't know where else to go." Frank stepped aside without a word. The man entered. 9:10 p.m. 2 men, 1 silence. They sat across from each other, a battered thermos of coffee between them. "I heard from Doris. She said you were different now." Frank chuckled bitterly. "Did she say what I used to be?" "A hard ass. Stubborn. Prideful. Pretty much the same things I remember." "She's not wrong." Michael sipped from the tin cup. "I'm clean now. 2 years. It stuck this time." Frank's fingers trembled. "That's good." "I lost the apartment. Couldn't pay rent. I slept in a shelter last night." "That's not good." Michael looked down. "I didn't come to ask for money." Frank looked at him directly. "Then why did you come?" Michael hesitated. "Because I'm tired of running from the only person I've ever hated and loved." "You hated me?" "Every day." Frank nodded. "Fair. You never looked for me after I left." "I didn't know where to begin, and part of me thought you didn't want to be found." Michael's eyes burned. "Part of me didn't." 10:12 p.m. A fragile bridge. Michael leaned back against the wall. "You still build things?" Frank smiled softly. "Only things that grow now." "Can I see it? The garden?" Frank hesitated, then nodded. They walked together, awkwardly, across the dark lot. Frank flicked on the solar lights. The garden glowed like a secret. Green leaves fluttered, wind whispered. Michael stared. "You made this?" "We did. Me, some kids, a few people who stopped being invisible." "It's beautiful." Frank looked at him. "So were you once." Michael didn't reply. But he didn't look away. Sunday, 7:30 a.m., the backyard. Michael sat with Greg on the back steps. The 2 brothers hadn't spoken in over 10 years. Greg handed over a cup of coffee without a word. "I thought you were dead," Greg finally said. "I was, in my own way," Michael replied. "You staying?" "If he lets me." Greg nodded. He's different. Don't screw that up. Michael smiled bittersweet. I'm trying not to. 10 o'clock a.m. Monday, 9 a.m. Community garden lot. Frank stood in the center of the garden, shovel in hand, sun on his shoulders. Michael was on his knees nearby, loosening soil, dirt caking his fingertips. He worked in silence, but it wasn't the silence of avoidance, it was focus. Javier was installing a new compost bin. May painted a welcome sign for visitors. Rosa brought lemonade and folding chairs. Greg arrived, unexpectedly, with his sons. They want to help, Greg said sheepishly. Frank raised an eyebrow. They know that means real sweat, right? I told them it meant video games. You'll fix that. Frank chuckled. Fair enough. 12:30 p.m. Lunch under the oak tree. Frank stood up, holding his paper cup in both hands. I was never supposed to be here, he said. The group quieted. I was supposed to fade out quietly, a garage ghost, a man whose usefulness expired the day he handed over the keys to someone younger. He paused. But I wasn't expired, just misplaced. This garden, this group reminded me that even rusted tools can rebuild something beautiful, that broken families can find each other again, that legacy isn't made of medals or job titles, it's made of people who carry pieces of you forward. He turned to Michael, who blinked hard and looked down. And I'm grateful I got the chance to carry you forward too. Silence. Then a single clap, then more, then a hug from May, then from both grandsons, then Greg, and then Michael. Wednesday, the big announcement. Doris pinned a flyer on the fence gate. St. Luke's Community Project, now a non-profit initiative. Frank read it with disbelief. We're what now? Doris smiled. A registered organization. You're listed as founding technical director. You put that in writing. Sure did. Frank shook his head, laughing. Evelyn would have thought I'd finally lost it. Evelyn, Doris said softly, would have cried happy tears. Friday, 6 p.m., Town Hall ceremony. The mayor handed Frank a small plaque. For revitalizing community, restoring dignity, and proving that no one is ever truly finished. The local paper took photos. Even the news station showed up. Frank felt strange in a dress shirt again, but it fit, not in the shoulders, but in the soul. After the ceremony, a young man approached him, clean shirt, nervous eyes. You're Mr. Dalton, right? I saw the story. I need a place to start over. Frank nodded. We've got soil. We've got sweat. What we don't got is people who quit. I don't plan to. Good. Be here at 8. Sunday, early morning, the garden. Frank walked alone through the rows of blooming greens, bell peppers, tomatoes, basil, tiny wildflowers at the edges. He bent down to pick a weed and paused. The sun broke through the trees, golden and quiet like Evelyn used to be. And in that light, Frank saw not what he had lost, but what he had left behind. A living thing, a healing thing, a story that didn't end when they tried to close his chapter. Later that day, Michael's voice. You know what I realized, Dad? What's that? You never needed a monument. Oh no? You built a place where people become better just by being in it. That's more permanent than stone. Frank looked out at the garden, at Greg showing his boys how to check irrigation, at May teaching a teenager how to paint, at Javier leading a soil workshop for new volunteers. and then he looked up at the sky. Forgotten no more. Not by a long shot.